Hey, welcome to the latest episode of the Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast, where we celebrate the work of the greatest adventure writer of the 20th century. My name is Tim DeForest. I'm the author of several books on pre-digital pop culture things like old-time radio, newspaper comic strips, and the pulp magazine that most of Edgar Rice Burroughs' work was originally published in. And I'm joined by my two co-hosts.
Well,
Jess,
my name is Jess Terrell, and you might know me from the Facebook discussion group for the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs, where we talk ERB and his characters, his worlds, and his great books. We talk Edgar Rice Burroughs pretty near 24/7. For the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs, Jess Terrell, glad to be here.
And this is Scott Stewart, writer and editor. Always enjoy being with the guys here doing this. I'm also with Randomized Studio, and we have a publication coming out right around the holiday season time called Red Canals, an exploratory magazine fanzine about all things related to Mars and stories, movies, books, and of course ERBs in there too. And both Tim and Jess have pieces coming out in that one. We'll give you more information as we get ready for the distribution on that. And I know there are a couple other projects going on, but I'll get more information on those later.
okay, and before we begin our podcast, and this is something, guys, I forgot to put in my notes in the outline that I sent you, but I wanted to mention a new book that published by McFarland Press, which is also the publisher that's published my books, that they were kind enough to send me a review copy of it. And the title is Jeiton, The Martian Chess of Edgar Rice Burroughs by Frederick Ekman. And I just wanted to talk about just how wonderful this book is. It's a book that fills a gap in the scholarship about Edgar Rice Burroughs that I don't think we all realized that gap existed until this book filled it. It's about the Martian chess that is described in The Chessmen of Mars, which, by the way, we covered in a podcast a few years ago, so you can go back and listen to that. But he discusses the rules of Jeiton, the variants that fans of Edgar Rice Burroughs or fans of chess have come up with. He talks about the influence it's had on other science fiction and how fictionalized versions of chess have showed up in other science fiction stories. He talks about the themes of the Chessmen of Mars and how the game of Jeiton relates to those themes. It is just a superbly researched and superbly written book, and I recommend it highly. Once again, it is Jeiton, The Martian Chess of Edgar Rice Burroughs by Frederick Ekman, published by McFarland Press. Okay, and next. Well, I believe I hear the apes of Kershak in the distance, reminding us that it is time for our trivia contest. Now, last time, we asked the question, who is the daughter of Tars Tarkas? The answer is Sola. We got a total of 5 listeners who sent us the correct answer, and the randomly chosen winner from that was named Michael, who received a copy of the new authorized edition of Tarzan the Invincible as his prize. And Michael, if you're listening, we appreciate your posting a photograph of that in the for love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs group, and we hope you enjoy the book. So we're doing another question this time. We are recording this on October 30th, and it should be released within a few days after that, October 30th, 2022, for those of you who are listening in the far future on the Starship Enterprise. The question I ask, you can send it in, the answer, if you know it, to our email address, which I'll give in a moment. Send it in by November 15th, 2022. And then you will be qualify for the drawing of all the correct answers to win a copy of, what is it? Tarzan the Magnificent. And once again, this is the new authorized edition with the wonderful Joe Jusko covers. These are possibly the best looking editions of the Tarzan books that have ever come out. That's arguable because we've had covers by Frazetta and Boris and, just dozens of other great artists. But Jusko just really knocks it out of the park with his covers. The prize is Tarzan the Magnificent, the authorized edition with the Joe Jusko cover. And here is the question. The question is, who was the captain of the O-222 during its maiden voyage to Pellucidor? Now, we're talking about its appearances in ERB's original novels, not any later appearances in stories written by others. So you just need to identify the name of the captain of the O-222 during its maiden voyage to Pellucidor. Send that answer to our Gmail address, edgarsmailbag@gmail.com. And that address will be in the show notes for you to get it. If you post it elsewhere on any other social media site or podcast site, it will not count as an entry. We need to centralize this so that we don't leave anybody out. So if you know the answer, be sure to send it to our Gmail address. One last time, the question is, who was the captain of the O-222 during its maiden voyage to Pellucidor? And we are referring just to Burroughs' original novels with this question, not to any later appearances of the O-222 or later versions of that Zeppelin in stories written by others. So name the captain and be in the drawing to win a copy of Tarzan the Magnificent. And that brings us to the book we are going to be discussing tonight, Tarzan's Quest, which was originally published in 6 parts in Blue Book magazine in 1935 and 1936 under the title Tarzan and the Immortal Men, which was actually a bit of a spoiler title, wasn't it? It was written a year before. It was written in 1934, then published in late 1935 and early 1936 as a serial, and then later published as a hardback. And as with all of Burroughs' books, it's gotten many, many different paperback reprints over the years. And I don't think that the authorized editions that are coming out now have gotten up to Tarzan's Quest, but they're getting close. So there'll be an authorized edition out there with a Joe Jusko cover soon. And I'm really anxious to see what Joe does with this story. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be summarizing 5 chapters at a time, and then Jess and Scott will be discussing the story and the various points we got out of it. So chapter 1, we meet Jane Clayton, who's having dinner with her friend, Lady Hazel Tennington, whom we had met way back, I believe, in The Return of Tarzan. And this, by the way, is the first appearance of Jane Clayton since Tarzan and the Ant-Men. Tarzan's Quest is the 19th book in the series, so we've had 8 books without any reference to Jane. Tarzan's just been wandering the jungle, stumbling across lost civilizations and having adventures, while Jane has apparently been waiting with infinite patience, either back at their bungalow or back in London. But this is her last major appearance in the original novels. And she really just is epic in this novel. One of my favorite aspects of Tarzan's Quest is just how amazing Jane is. So she and Lady Hazel are having dinner, and they bump into the princess. It's Sborov. Do one of you want to guess on how you pronounce that?
Spell that again, please.
The name of the princess, Sborov. I'm just going to refer to her as Kitty from now on, but I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. The Princess Borov with the SB silent? Who knows?
I think it'd be a blend like Boros.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So her name was Kitty Krause. She is now a princess because she's married Prince Alexis Saborov. But Alexis is, as we're going to see pretty quickly, he's just a jerk, and he's also broke. I don't think the story ever establishes for sure whether he was actually a princess or a prince rather, or if that was just part of his story to get to marry a rich woman. So whether or not he's actually a real prince, he's broke, he's dishonest, and he's totally rotten. But Kitty is totally in love with the guy and doesn't see him for what he is at all. Now, Kitty tells Jane and Hazel about an American gangster who had told them about a secret formula that would give you immortality that exists somewhere in Africa. So this racketeer has talked Kitty into financing an expedition to find the witch doctor who has this formula. So Jane is going off to meet Tarzan in Nairobi. So she agrees to accompany Kitty and Alexis rather, to Africa. And that is chapter 1. Chapter 2 switches to Tarzan. And this is going to be the usual pattern throughout this novel. One chapter on Jane and her group, and then a chapter on Tarzan as he's having what at first seems to be a separate adventure. It's all going to tie together eventually. What Tarzan is doing is investigating the disappearances of a lot of young girls between the ages of 14 and 20. And some of these include Wazari girls. The Wazari are the tribe that Tarzan is the chief of. So he's investigating this, but a lot of the natives that he's questioning are very superstitious about whoever is kidnapping these girls, and they won't tell him anything. So Tarzan at first just figures, well, I'm not going to get anywhere with this. He's accompanied by his monkey friend Nakima, and he's about to give up when some of his Wazari warriors, led by Muvuro, who's sort of like the top Wazari warrior, show up because Muvuro's daughter's been kidnapped, and that makes it personal. So the rumors are that a people called the Kavuru are responsible for her disappearance, but nobody knows where they are. Tarzan is going to go on ahead to a village near where Kavuru country apparently is located to see if he can find out something about the missing girl. There's a violent storm, and as the group is huddling to wait for the storm to abate, Tarzan hears a airplane flying overhead. And by the way, as I'm summarizing this, I am referring to the chapter summary of Tarzan's quest that's available on the ERB list as part of the Edgar Rice Burroughs chapter summary. And I just want to credit them. I'm occasionally quoting almost directly from those summaries as I summarize this. Now, chapter 3 takes us back to Jane, who's now on that airplane. The pilot, his name is Brown. He's struggling to keep the plane in the air during this storm. Also aboard are Jane, her husband Alexis, or Kitty's husband Alexis. I was giving Jane a new husband there. Kitty's handmaid Annette, a French girl, and Alexei's English valet Tibbs. Now, Brown tells Jane that they've lost their compass. They're completely lost. They've brought too many supplies. They've got too much weight on the plane, and they are going to run out of gas. We find out right away that Brown doesn't think much of Alexis. His suggestion for staying in the air longer is to throw the prince who's complaining about everything overboard. They have no gas. They have no parachutes. Alexis, who's now in a panic, is verbally attacking his wife. Tibbs, the butler, is trying to comfort Annette, the maid, and they run out of grass, and Brown now has no choice but to try to land on top of the trees in the jungle. Now in chapter 4, the plane crashes into the treetops. There's no serious injuries. The passengers, they all pretty much show their personalities in this. Jane takes charge. She keeps her cool. She suggests they wait for the storm. Then they descend. They bring whatever useful supplies they have. Alexis is complaining about everything. Kitty is in a useless panic. Brown is proving to be a reliable guy. But we see by the way they react to this dangerous situation exactly what their personalities are and who Jane can depend on and who she won't be able to depend on. In that same chapter, we switch back to Tarzan. Tarzan and Nakima, after the storm is over, go to a local village, and they ask about the Kavuru, the people who are supposedly kidnapping the girls. He just walks up to Adula, the chief, and he questions him. Now, Adula claims to know nothing about the Kavuru, and his warriors surround Tarzan, and Adula accuses Tarzan of being a spy for the Kavuru. And the chapter ends with the warriors attacking the ape man. Chapter 5 takes us back to Jane. Once again, Burroughs is doing this interweaving where he's going back and forth between the stories and leaving each group behind at a cliffhanger moment in order to build tension. Jane is once again in charge. It's her plan to get supplies from the luggage compartment. She's able to climb out into the tree through the branches to the compartment and change into more suitable clothes. The others are worried about her climbing, but she's having no trouble. She's completely agile in the trees. She's learned a lot from Tarzan over the years. Jane is just taken over as leader of the group. She scouts the area. She leaves instructions for the others to lower supplies to the ground. Brown and Alexis are continuing to argue with each other. Jane discovers a clearing nearby, which would make a good campsite. And she returns to the plane, but she senses something following her. So Alexis by now has been lowered to the ground, and she orders him to climb a tree because a lion is coming. Brown lowers a strap for Alexis, and Jane is, urging them to hurry because there's a lion coming. And that ends chapter 5. And what I like about these first 5 chapters, and you guys jump in anytime with what you think, is just how effectively Burroughs defines the characters on the plane. We know pretty much right away that Brown is a good guy. And we know that Tibbs will probably be dependable as far as he's capable of. But Alexis and Kitty are established as spoiled and pretty much useless. We also see that Jane is now completely at home in the jungle. She early in their marriage to Tarzan, she wanted them to stay away from the jungle. Now she's completely at home there. She shows not just courage, but she shows intelligence and practicality in dealing with the plane wreck and coming up with intelligent plans on what to do next.
I would agree with that because his characterizations here are quite well defined, and he defines them in such a way that we see where stereotypes of these people come from, not the fact that he's basing his writing on the stereotypes to try and get it into our head. He defines them in our own thought of who they are and why we see them. Similar characters in other stories are there because of his original definition of them.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just his ability not just to jump into the story quickly, but to introduce these characters to us so quickly and effectively is very impressive. It's typical of Burroughs' skill as an adventure storyteller, but I think it's particularly noticeable here how well he does it.
And I'd like to add in this piece here, which almost seems incidental, the storm, because it's to create more calamity for the plane crash and the meshing of the sounds when they hear the airplane come by. But for Burroughs' writing, if you want to call it the poetry of pulp writing, he actually, in a way, comes very similar to earlier writings by Ernest Hemingway with the Nick Adams stories and stuff like that, rather than a grandiose type gothic. I have a huge love for Edgar Allan Poe, but he will go in some very, very deep, classical descriptions. I just want to read like this paragraph or two on the storm towards the end of chapter 2, where it says, "The wind now was whipping the topmost branches of the trees. The thunder grew nearer and increased in violence. As the clouds sank thicker across the sky, gloomy darkness settled upon the jungle. Lightning flashed. Thunder crashed terrifically, and then the rain fell, came in solid sheets, bending the trees beneath its weight. And over all, Usha screamed like a lost soul. The 11 men squatted with shoulders hunched against the beating rain, waiting for the first fury of the storm to spend itself." I can see and hear and feel that whole scene from that description that he gives on there. It's just such a small part, but it makes it show, like for this book and how he's written in so many of his Tarzan stories, why it's so enjoyable to read, at least for me.
Yeah, it's a very vivid and evocative scene. I agree. It's a great example of Burroughs' skill as a writer.
It's fuel that the imagination can easily bring to life. I saw those images as you were reading. You did a fine job reading it there, Scott. Very vivid.
Well, thank you. I
But
just
yeah,
learned to read last week, so I'm taking a whole lot of his novels real quick.
it is typical of Burroughs's skill of his prose that he is able to bring these scenes to life, that he does fire up our imagination so that we do see what's happening while we're reading it in such a vivid manner.
Uh,
Uh,
I've got a few things to say if I may jump in.
mhm.
All right, back at overall, I find this entire story to be a metaphor for a new start. Um, we have a fountain of youth, and we have Jane returning after a long absence. Jane's, I think you've already done the math. Jane's been gone for 8 books, which, by my calculation, depending on what timeline a person uses with these stories, and that's open to interpretation, but roughly 6 years is what I figure. 8 books, 6 years. And now she's back and presumably so that she's been gone for a long time, at least been absent, that the reader, as far as the reader knows, and now time to get back together with Tarzan. Of course, unfortunately, we don't see her again after this adventure, which I think is just another opportunity lost.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do know that that Burroughs did actually want to kill Jane off back in Tarzan the Untamed, and that was vetoed by the publishers.
Right.
So he did want Tarzan to be on his own, unencumbered with a mate, so he could just go off and have adventures. And he in the end he handled it by just having Jane not around.
Right.
One thing I do like about him including Jane this one more time, right in the middle of the last, dozen novels, is that it tells us that it's not because they broke up or that anything bad happened. They still love each other. They're still devoted to each other. They're still married. So I think the way I see it is Jane just came to understand that Tarzan needs his time alone in the jungle. And that's part of what their relationship will consist of. And she'll be back in London, or she might during some of that time she might have been in the bungalow in Africa, and Tarzan might have come back to see her and spend some time with her.
Right. We don't know what
Yeah.
happens in between the
Yeah. Yes, but I think Jess, I think in the last podcast you suggested that Jane was probably running the business, the Greystoke finances, which makes sense after, bad financial advice left them broke one or two times in the early novels. I could see just, Jane saying, "Look, I'm just going to look after this and make sure no one messes up with our money again." So you don't have to go to Opar and mess with the Drop Dead Gorgeous law anymore, by the way. I'll make sure we've got plenty of money. So um, so, so all of those make sense. But one thing I do enjoy about this, it's not the main slant of the novel, but just that it establishes that nothing went awry with their marriage. It's just Tarzan spends time alone in the jungle because that's who he is. And I think Jane came to understand and accept that.
I understand. Certainly, and it's always been made clear that Tarzan, made clear by Burroughs, that Tarzan has behaved himself. Just today, in fact, I posted a picture of Nemone, or Nemone perhaps, from City of Gold, and he was as taken with her as he was with any woman, but he kept his distance. To be clear, he kept his distance, and behaved himself and stayed true to Jane. So he's had opportunities that he's just let go because he recognized, acknowledged, and very much remembered he was a married man.
Which is also the reason we often had co-heroes in the later novels.
True.
So that's somebody who could fall in love with the princess or whoever.
Well, I think Brown's an example of that in this very story.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think also you take in the context of the time in the world, now people still will travel around the world and be gone many miles from their family or friends or loved ones. But we have planes and cars that move much faster. Traditionally, people who were in the Navy or going out to sea or whaling ships, expedition leaders, archaeologists would be gone from their families and other people for months, if not years, in pursuit of the work or mission they were doing before they got back, because travel was much more inconvenient, expensive, and took so much more time. So for them to be apart for a year, a couple years at a time, isn't as unusual at that time as we tend to think about people now growing up and everyone staying around at the homestead or the farm or ranch.
Yeah. And also, once Tarzan and Jane achieve immortality, if you're going to live essentially forever, then being apart 10 years might be like being apart one day for those of us who live a normal lifespan, because, you're not really losing that much time. So, who knows how the psychology of that works once you become effectively immortal. Um,
I've got some other comments here, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
This first chapter and the first part of this book is our introduction to Burroughs' view of the upper crust of society, I mean, with all the lords and ladies and that sort of thing. It reminded me of a quotation from Darnaud in Return of Tarzan, where Tarzan has just had a run in there in Paris, and with some hoodlums or thieves or something, and of course he whooped them. Not everyone fares as well as Tarzan does against the people who are trying to rob you there on the streets of Paris or any place for that matter. The quotation from Darnaud is, "It is difficult to rise above the jungle standards and reason by the light of civilized ways." That's a little tongue-in-cheek, I think, commenting that the differences between civilization and the jungle and where the real jungle occurs. Actually, you get held up by some thieves on the streets of Paris or any city, and you wonder if how civilized that area is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think all this does reinforce Burroughs' message of healthy lifestyle, being around nature, exercise, eat right, and value the truly important things. So that's what I got from that.
Yeah, and also Burroughs clearly recognizes the hypocrisy that often exists within what was, supposedly civilized life.
Hypocrisy is exactly the word I was looking for. Good
Yeah,
catch.
and it's the similarity that Tarzan has to Conan the Barbarian, Robert E. Howard's character. Someone who like comes from outside civilizations, has an outside perspective, and recognizes how corrupt and hypocritical civilization could often be, and comes to think of, in Tarzan's case, jungle life, in Conan's case, the barbarian people that he grew up with, to be just more honest, not necessarily less brutal or less deadly, but at least more honest in what they were and what their goals were than in civilized life.
Very well said. That's what I was trying to get to. You said it very nicely there.
Thank you.
Good parallel there, which reminds me of when we were talking about I Am a Barbarian a few episodes or months ago. The same, coming out from the Britain tribes or barbarians there, and his view on the hypocrisy and lies and corruption in the Roman government.
Yeah, it's a common theme in Burroughs's work, and at least in the Tarzan novels, and it's very effectively delineated here. I agree, because Alexis and Kitty are the two least admirable people in the group, whereas Brown is the lower class guy with a questionable background in some ways, but he's the one you can depend on, and he's the one that will stick by your side when things get dangerous.
Well, that's a good segue to my next comment here is about Brown. I saw some verbiage. I don't think it was in the book, but that's what I'm asking, where if you all saw this, that equated Brown to being associated with gangsters or criminals or anything like that. Did you all see anything like that?
No, it's mentioned in the chapter summary that I was quoting from, and okay. I think I said it. I don't recall it in the book. I may have missed it. Brown did know about the immortality stuff and was initially hoping he could be in on it.
Right.
But if there was a reference to him being, apparently the person who did the chapter summary on the ERB list, and they do excellent jobs, caught a reference to it. Or made a rare mistake in referring to him as a gangster. Mm-hmm. If he was referred to as a gangster, I simply missed it.
Well, I didn't see it either, and I did not do a word search, but mm-hmm. I could.
Yeah.
But in any instance of finding, of course, would have to be looked at the context in which it's used. But my point with all this is I did not see it, but I can say, first of all, you're correct. He did have an interest in the Kavuru longevity elixir, and I prefer to say longevity as opposed. What'd you call it?
Immortality.
Immortality. Thank you.
Yeah.
because I think a person, my understanding is a person with still age given time, they're not going to live forever. They're just going to have a long life. So I see a distinction
Yeah.
there. And to be clear, they're not invulnerable. They're not like Superman who can watch bullets bounce off his chest. If they get shot or something like that, they got problems just like anybody else.
Yeah, they can still be killed by violence or accident. I suppose they could still catch a disease.
I would think so.
You could still die of cholera. You just won't die of old age, or won't for centuries. However it works.
Right. But back to Brown, I think he does have street smarts. I think he's capable of taking care of himself. But he does not strike me as someone who would steal or harm a decent person, or who would work for a high level gangster that would require him to kill, threaten, or steal. In some way. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to jump in. I could see him doing some bootlegging as long as it didn't involve violence.
Well, now that's a good point. He might that is possible, and he is a good pilot. He does know how to handle that plane. In fact, my impression from the way Burroughs states it is that they could have crashed if it hadn't been for Brown's skill as a pilot. And I can see where possibly there might be a need to fly some bootleg.
He could have been loading up on Canadian Scotch and flying it into the field outside Chicago, and he wouldn't have been involved in a gang war or in killing innocent people to keep it a secret. He just would have, he would have been a courier,
right?
And I can see him doing that, and that being part of his history.
Yeah, that sounds plausible to me. I also want to note he has the decency throughout this story. Remember, Jane is a married woman. And she's an attractive woman. Sure, he'll admit that, but he knows she's married. He's not going to touch her. We talked about piloting skills. He does talk to people such as that. What's his name? Alexis. About adapting to the reality of the situation that they're in. But royalty still insists on being royal. So those are my comments for chapter 3. And also on chapter 4, I simply want to state that's where we begin to see Jane's leadership style. And I'm leadership is a favorite topic of mine. And so seeing her be able to take charge like that is possibly my favorite part from this whole book. And this is one of my favorite books in general. But that really appeals to me.
Yeah, we saw her being pretty epic on her own way back in Tarzan the Terrible when she was escaping from a German officer. But in this case, she's both epic in that way, and she's also taking on that leadership role and doing it well. She is a good leader.
Right, and we see jungle skills on display again in chapter 5, which is what I was going to point out. And all of this tells me that, and I don't like to criticize Burroughs. He certainly was plenty successful, and I certainly love his work. But I do wish Jane had been in a joint adventure with Tarzan as a working partner to him. I think this just shows that she has the aptitude and the abilities to do that.
That would have been cool. Now it's probably a good time to mention the online Edgar Rice Burroughs Comics has just started a Jane comic strip, which got off with it to a magnificent start and really does show Jane as being the capable person she is.
Good point. And I think Jane will still appear periodically in the new, I hate to use the word reboot, but the continuation of the Eternal Savage webcomic. Jane has certainly been a vital member over at the Tarzan Twins webcomic, at least to this point. But I think that her time there might be done, I believe.
I think the Jane comic is spinning off from the Tarzan, directly from the Tarzan Twins,
because they got the young lady from Paludan, and her pet Griff is there too. And Cord came over, and they all look very robust, like they've been hitting vitamins. For the weight room. But it's very promising. Okay, good. That's all my comments. Please proceed.
Okay. Well, chapters 6 through 10. Chapter 6 jumps back to Tarzan, so we still have that jumping from one chapter to the next, the interweaving. He's now a prisoner of this tribe. He does try to get away. He grabs a native as a shield and tries to get away, but he's knocked out. But there's an argument between the witch doctor who thinks they should not kill Tarzan because he thinks he's part of the Kavuru and there'll be some sort of disaster if they kill him. The chief wants to kill him, so they call for a vote by the warriors, in which they pass a gourd around in which they're supposed to place a kernel of corn into the gourd to vote for life, or a pebble to vote for death. But the ballot's overwhelmingly for death. Tarzan does not do well in politics, apparently, because the vote is against him. But they're going to. The plan is to torture and kill him the next evening, and then chapter ends that night when Tarzan is in a hut tied up, and somebody enters that hut. We don't know who yet. Chapter 7 switches back to Jane and the others. They were lowering themselves down from the plane when a lion shows up. Jane climbs the trees. Alexis is hauled up by a strap and faints while this is happening. It's just another sign that he's just cowardly. He's pulled up into the plane. Kitty is also useless. She's completely hysterical. Jane climbs back up to them and she calms down the situation. She plans to shoot the lion, but it turns out, and Burroughs gets some great humor in this with the guns. Alexis didn't pack any ammunition for the rifles. Tibbs has a pistol, but that's already been lowered to the ground. And when they finally get to that later on, they discover that Tibbs didn't bring any bullets for it either. So they don't have any firearms, which Jane thinks is funny. She doesn't panic or yell at anybody or anything. She just laughs at it. They get everybody to the ground. Kitty, by the way, is now very upset with Alexis and threatens to cut him out of the will. And this is going to be important later on. And the chapter ends with most of them down on the ground and the rest getting ready to come down. Chapter 8 switches back to Tarzan again. It's the witch doctor who's entered the hut. He wants to free Tarzan in the hopes that the Kavuro will not hurt him or take his daughters. Remember, he still thinks Tarzan is part of the Kavuro. So he gives Tarzan directions to the Kavuro country and cuts him loose. Tarzan gets away that way. But he goes in to get his weapons. This is another cool scene. He has to sneak into a hut past sleeping warriors to get his personal weapons. And when one of the warriors wakes up, Tarzan tells him he's a Kavuro and just scares the guy into leading him out the gates. In the meantime, Nekima, who doesn't know Tarzan has escaped, is leaving for home. And that, he'll be back in the story before long. Finds a lion attacking a white man. And this is Yedena, the Kavuro. Tarzan saves him. He kills the lion, which Jess, you did a spreadsheet. This was like lion number 30, I think, that he kills over the course of the series. From the count you did.
I forgot all about my spreadsheet. Yeah, you're right. I've got it here someplace.
Yeah, it's just when I was reading that, I got curious to how many lions he had killed over the course of the series, and you did a quick search and a spreadsheet, and this, I believe, was lion number 30. So, Tarzan asks Yedena, the Kavuro, to take him to his chief. Yedena just tells Tarzan he has to leave, or the Kavuro are going to kill him. He's willing to let Tarzan get away because Tarzan saved him, but that's as far as they'll go. 9 goes back to Jane again. They all make it to a clearing where they've set up a boma. They surround themselves with thorns and make some shelters. That's where they discovered that Tibbs' pistol is first just a little tiny 22, and second has no ammunition. But Jane makes a bow and some arrows and a spear. She's learned everything she needs to learn from Tarzan over the years. She also borrows Brown's knife, and she's going to go out and hunt some food for them. So Brown wants to go with her, but she takes to the trees and just leaves him behind. He can't keep up that way. She's just impressing them all with how well she's doing. Now, while she's gone, Brown and Alexis are still quarreling with each other. Also Brown starts to build up a relationship with Annette, the French maid. You can predict pretty early, I think, that those two are going to end up together. Jane, out in the jungle, she kills an antelope, but then a leopard appears, to stalking her. She doesn't want to give up the kill, so she fires an arrow at the leopard. And then we switch. This is a great cliffhanger. We switch back to the camp where we hear the screams of the leopard, where Brown and the others hear the screams of the leopard, and they don't know what's happening to poor Jane out there. so he and Tibbs leave the camp to try and find Jane and help her. Um, Ken goes back to Tarzan, who's still with Yadina, the Kavuro guy. Tarzan's still insisting on meeting the Kavuro chief. And Yadina's still saying that, no, you'll just be killed if that happens. Tarzan also asks if the Kavuro are the ones who are actually kidnapping all the young women, or why, don't they have enough of their own? And this is where we start to get hints of what's going on with the Kavuro. He says that they haven't had women for 80 years. And of course, that doesn't make sense because Yadina appears to be a young man. So, the whole 80 years with no women in their tribe doesn't make any sense at all because they couldn't possibly have young men in the village if that were the case, as far as Tarzan knows. So Burroughs, I think, very expertly starts to set up what we're going to find out about the Kavuro and the longevity pills. So Tarzan leaves Yadina trying to give the impression that he's given up, but he's going to circle back and follow him. But in the meantime, Yadina kidnaps a girl who turns out to be the daughter of the witch doctor. They have a way of like making a sound that hypnotizes girls and has them walk out into the jungle, and then they can catch them, rope them and tie them up and carry them out back through the trees. So Tarzan's following them. When the spell wears off on the girl and she can talk, she thinks that she must have been kidnapped. This guy must be the same person they had prisoner. That must be Tarzan. And she starts saying, "You have to keep your promise to my dad, not to harm her." But that doesn't, that Yadina has no idea about that. But to Tarzan, who overhears this, it means that he is obligated to help this girl. So that night, while Yadina sleeps, Tarzan carries the girl away. She thinks that Tarzan is still another Kavuro, but she's willing to take her chances with him. So that's chapters 6 through 10. One thing I wanted to start out by saying is that voting process for whether or not to kill Tarzan using the corn kernels and the pebbles, I think that was very clever. And I think it was a great way to add tension to the scene about whether or not, Tarzan was going to get a death sentence.
I like that too. And another thing that caught my attention on that area is with the chief or the head of the warriors being in conflict with the witch doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we saw this in Tarzan and the Ant-Man too. There's actually a political play in there. And when we go back and I think like Apache Devil, you would have like the medicine man and the chief could be at odds. And I don't think this is a crutch or a cliche that Burroughs uses in the stories because just recently I was watching a version of Three Musketeers. And in there you have the Cardinal and the King, and they're both vying for legitimate power. And you can pull out a lot. We were talking about, Robert E. Howard and Conan earlier with stories that way. And so many traditional stories that it's a legitimate use of dynamics and personality. It's a trope that is effective and used and isn't a cliche or a short way where he's trying to create conflict, artificial conflict. It's a very real thing in spaces of power like that.
Yeah, and it makes sense. The chief is the secular power, and the witch doctor is pretty much the spiritual or religious power, and they're going to conflict with each other. So it makes perfect sense whether it's in an African village or in 17th century Paris with the king and the cardinal. You're always going to have that conflict as long as there's a chance to gain actual real power. Where anytime you have a corrupt religious institution where what they want is not to lead the people spiritually in a legitimate religion, but rather to gain political power, they're going to conflict with the secular power. It's inevitable. So yeah, I agree. It's not contrived at all. It's a perfectly reasonable plot device. One thing, I'm going to talk about Brown for a moment here. He's obviously one of the good guys, and we like him, and we know we can depend on him. I think his one fault is that he can't stop arguing with Alexis and Kitty. Jane has to ask him. She shows more wisdom when she tells him to just set it aside and try and reduce tension in the group because they've got to survive together now. But all the same, even though Brown is kind of contemptuous of Alexa and Kitty, and he's too quick to argue with them, when they were lowering Kitty down from the plane, he does show some compassion towards her when he sees just how terrified she is. So even though he doesn't think much of Kitty and doesn't think anything at all of Alexis, he can still show compassion towards at least Kitty when she shows herself to be near panic in that situation. So, and I think we've already mentioned Jane's great leadership skills. When she finds out there's no, pistol for Tibbs's little tiny gun, she just laughs. She doesn't get angry. She's not critical of Tibbs. She just blows it off and moves on and tries to keep the morale of the group up.
Accept things the way they are. Accept the card that the hand that's been dealt to you if you're playing card, for example.
And recognize the importance of morale within the group. They can't be arguing with each other, and you can't, a small group like that, you can't be drill sergeant leader. That wouldn't work. So she shows wisdom as a leader in so many ways. We see a little bit of foreshadowing when Kitty says she's going to cut the Alexei out of the will, and his eyes are described as going into ugly slits. At that moment, you can easily believe that Alexis would commit murder to protect his wealth. So,
observation I would like to make, if I may.
Please.
Someplace in here, there's some comments on Tarzan kind of moving at his own speed, and that's my words, that's not a direct quote. But it occurred to me and we've already established that Jane's been at least out of the books for some period of time, and I was thinking about if this means he's been acting, he's had the house to himself. Imagine the mess he's made, for example. I mean, there's got to be dirty loincloths laying over in the corner that should have been laundered a long time ago. He probably still has a carcass that he gutted, still hanging out in the front yard. And then there's probably cat hair from Jab Baljah all over the place. So he really needs to get home and get that mess cleaned up. And here he is out here doing the hero thing, which he does so well. Mm-hmm. And so if he's a little moving a little slower, a little distracted, I think he's wondering how Jane's going to react when she sees the mess he left back home.
Probably why he didn't want to be bothered earlier with the rescue.
Well, yeah, that was my point.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I think you got a good point on the chronology. I think your years and the tales add up pretty well there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, there are several chronologies available, all from very thorough Burroughs researchers. That's just the one that I prefer, and I have my reasons for preferring it. And it's all kind of the great Korok time discrepancy doesn't help any at all when you're trying to figure out these dates. But it's just something to put a little context on, I suppose. It's an approximation.
Yeah,
those chronology books are fun and interesting too. Mm-hmm. They're a really good source to it.
Yeah, and in the end, the Korok time discrepancy is going to be there, no matter how. There's been great theories for how to explain it, but none of them are ever completely satisfactory. It's just something that's there, and I am interested, Scott. I think you mentioned last time that you learned an upcoming book from
Win Scott Eckert.
Win Scott Eckert is going
to maybe put it to rest once and for all.
Yeah, I think he'll come up with a great idea. Whether he uses a pre-existing theory or something brand new, I think it'll be great. It's not going to make everybody happy though. Korok,
but I trust his instincts.
Mm-hmm. I do too.
I agree. If anyone can explain this thing satisfactorily, Wynn can do it.
Yeah,
so I'm anxious to see what he has.
But I think we could all pop immortality pills and be talking about it, 30,000 years from now, and there would still be people unsatisfied with any explanation that's come up.
Well, it's a timeless subject.
It is. Yes. I do want to comment on there's a lot of humor in this book. We're going to see it later on when Nakima takes center stage for a while, but things like just the whole thing with the weapons, with Alexei leaving, not bringing ammo, and then they want to get Tibbs's pistol and they have to go down to the ground to get it, and then there's no bullets for that, and Tibbs didn't think to mention that. That's all funny. And Brown is a great line where he tells Alexei that I know you come from a long line of cab drivers, which kind of refers to a stereotype where, like people who escaped from Russia who were nobility, when the communists took over, would end up working as a cab driver in the U.S. That was kind of a stereotype. So that's just a funny line, and when you take it in context of the time. So Burroughs, he gets opportunities to show his sense of humor in this book, I think a little bit more than in a lot of other Tarzan books. Also, there's kind of something interesting when Tarzan first realizes that the witch doctor's daughter has been kidnapped by the Kavuru. We know that Tarzan has a strong sense of honor and of right and wrong, but his upbringing has still left him with sometimes like a kind of a ruthless attitude towards life. Though, Jess, I know you're going to have some stuff to talk about this. I'm just going to just going to quote from, I think you mentioned it before we started recording. So, just a quote from chapter 10. To him, the life of the black girl was no more than the life of an antelope or that of any other beast of the jungle. To Tarzan, all were beasts, including himself, and none with any rights greater than another, except when that which he might win by strength or cunning or ferocity. So at first, he seems to be disinterested in saving the girl, and it's not until he realizes that she's the witch doctor's daughter, that he feels an obligation to rescue her, because he had promised the witch doctor that his daughter would be safe. So he's seems to be a little bit ruthless here. Superman would jump in and save any innocent person. With Tarzan, it's not necessarily 100% guaranteed that he would save you. I
was just going to say, I think he's also showing here the difference between living in two different worlds or societies or personalities, where at first it's just somebody out there. Then he discovers that he has a personal link to it. In a similar respect, my sympathies to families over in Seoul, Korea, the last couple of days with the 150 some people who killed in the crushing of the street and alleys there. Normally, I'm only bringing that up to show that we hear about these tragedies around the world, and China and England or whatever, and it's just it's sad. It's another tragedy. But where this happened, Itaewon, I'm very familiar with the area. I lived in that area 20 years ago and know the area quite well. And it creates a different impact on your reaction and your thought and how you do it. Same if someone in your family gets hurt or something happens, as opposed to hearing something about a similar incident on the news or through email from someone you don't know or vaguely know. When you have some type of personal connection, I think ERB is very much showing our human nature compared to, well, you could even say it happens with pets, how dogs and cats or other pets react in their surroundings to people they live with compared to strangers, and if there's a care or not there. So I think actually it's a very deep, a subtle but deep point that ERB could be making here.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. But I also kind of like that he remembers that Tarzan is, he did have his upbringing in the jungle, until he was, how old was he? 19 or 20 or a little older when he finally,
19 or 20 is about right.
Yeah, when he finally encountered civilized people. And he'd been pretty much at war with the cannibal tribe that was there, the only other humans he'd ever seen. And he did grow morally. There's that wonderful scene in Return of Tarzan where he learns that he doesn't need to consider all black men as enemies and that he has to judge people on an individual basis. Which is like an important bit of moral growth for him. But
his problem with the local tribe there was really he blamed all of them for Kala's death.
Oh yeah, no, I get that. We understand his point of view, but we also see where he still had some moral growth he needed to go through, because he was, in his mind, he was extending that to every black man he saw was an enemy, and it was in Return to Tarzan where he had his epiphany, where he realized, oh no, that's wrong. I can't do that. I have to judge them as individuals because this guy I'm seeing fighting a lion is obviously brave and he's got dignity and he's got courage and
Oh yeah,
why can't I be a friend with him?
right.
So he did have moral growth, but he still does have a survival of the fittest attitude in some ways because he needed that connection to where, oh, this is a girl I had promised to keep safe, so I need to save her before he actually made an effort to save her. It wasn't an automatic thing the way it would have been with say Superman or Batman.
I think going in on that, on where we're talking about his understanding, if you want to call it morality or maturing or learning, accepting the difference, let's say, maybe be from the animalistic species to the human side, is illustrated very well in the fact that in animal society, he being superior would take Jane for his own. But instead, when he's given the note that confirms who his real identity is, and they ask who he is, he crushes the note and does not tell them the truth because he doesn't feel it would be appropriate and be right to take Jane's conception of what her life and love is at that time compared to who he is.
Yep. Yeah. So it's just, I think this just shows Tarzan to be a very complicated character. The Johnny Weissmuller stereotype that most people think of when they think of Tarzan just isn't accurate to the way Burroughs presents him. There are depths to his personality and to his thought processes that are sometimes complex.
I agree.
So, okay, any other comments on chapter 6 through 10, or should we move on?
Nothing for me.
Okay. Well, chapter 11 takes us back to Jane's group. Brown and Tibbs had run out at the sound of, a leopard scream. They were afraid Jane was in trouble, but they discovered she had taken out the leopard with a couple of arrows. And once again, they're really impressed with her. It's like Jane can do anything. So they take the antelope back. They have steaks that night. They're discussing plans for how to get back to civilization, and Jane decides that she should go for help alone while the others hunker down here. But that night, we know things are going to go wrong because we get a scene from Alexis's point of view. First, he's like fallen in lust for Jane. You can't call it love or any sort of legitimate attraction. It's obviously just lust. And he also feels a lust for his wife's fortune, which comes to $70 million. And so, during the night, Brown and Tibbs are standing guard. Brown is talking to Tibbs and says if Kitty wasn't around, because she's the physically weakest of all, then maybe they could all go to try and find civilization. The main reason Jane is going to go alone is that Kitty can't travel with the rest of them. Alexa comes out for his watch. During Brown's guard duty, Annette joins him, so we get some more evidence that those two are falling in love. But she says that she woke up because she felt like somebody was crawling around in the hut she was in, which is the same hut that Kitty was in. And that brings us to chapter 12, where they discover that Kitty's head has been split open during the night. She's been murdered. Now, Brown rightfully suspects Alexis. I doubt anyone reading this from the first time would suspect anybody from Alexis. We know he had anybody but Alexis. We know he had a motive. Tibbs has to say that Brown had said that if Kitty weren't around, they would all be able to get back to civilization. So that makes Brown a suspect. They all begin to accuse each other, and they talk about motives and alibis. Alexis just insists they should look for the murder weapon, and they search and they find the bloody hatchet in Brown's things. But, Brown just knows that Alexis must have planted it there. But as chapter 12 ends, it looks to the others that Brown actually might be guilty of the murder. Chapter 13, we go back to Burroughs and the Wazari warriors. They come across Nikima, who's trying to lead them somewhere. So they're led to the village where Tarzan was held prisoner, and they approach it peacefully. They just want to find out what's going on. Um, you know, they're told that Tarzan was there, but he's not any longer. They make sure there's only 10 Wazari warriors. There's not a lot of them. And, he permits them to enter the village. But that night when they're eating together, they drug them. They give them a drug drink, and they're captured. When they wake up, they're all tied up and they realize they're in trouble. And the chapter ends with them, the Wazari warriors, wondering what will happen to them next. Chapter 14 is back to Tarzan, who's with the witch doctor's daughter. And she's starting to feel safe with Tarzan, even though she's now suspecting that he's a demon. He's asking her to tell her people that he's not with the Kavuro, and she says she will. He returns her to the village. Now Nekima catches up with Tarzan. Nekima, at first, doesn't remember that the Wazari are captive. And I love this too. He remembers that Nekima is not a man, that he's a monkey, and his thought processes are never going to be quite the same as a man. It's a while before he remembers that the Wazari were a prisoner, and he tells this to Tarzan. So they go back to the village. He goes into the huts and he frees them. And the chapter 14 ends with them waiting for the guards to come in so that they can jump them. Now, chapter 15 jumps back to Jane and her group. So they all agree to head back to civilization together now. And Brown agrees to go with them, even though he's afraid that any trial for murder will be unfair. So he figures he will stay in Africa and search for the perpetual youth formula. They have a discussion about what direction to go in. Alexa wants to go one way, Jane wants to go the other. In the end, Jane makes the decision which way they'll go. They pack up what they can carry. Jane finds a little piece of evidence, a piece of burned fabric that is a part of Alexa's shirt, I think it was, that he got blood on. That's an indication that he had to burn this and that maybe he is guilty of the murder. So there's evidence now both pointing towards Brown and evidence pointing towards Alexis. Although, once again, I don't think anybody reading this for the first time will have any doubt at all that Alexis is the killer. Jane leaves a note behind in their camp in case someone comes by, and they start out towards the east, the direction that Jane thinks they should travel. And that is chapters 11 through 15. Actually, I want to say that the dialogue among the various members of Jane's party is just wonderfully written. Each person is given his own personality, his own style of speaking. And Brown and Annette's interactions are just really sweet. It's not just a tacked on love story. You can really believe these two are sweet on each other. And what do you guys think of the murder mystery? Did anybody, it's probably been years since we all read this for the first time. Does anybody remember having any doubt at all that Alexis was the killer?
I certainly had no doubt. But I do welcome a murder mystery. I mean, there could always be a twist or turn there we don't anticipate. And it could be the other person I think would be the most likely. Well, I can't say that either. I started to say that our pilot might have been a cult, might have been a suspect, but I shouldn't say that because I don't think that's the case. I think Alexis would be the primary suspect here. Go ahead. I think Scott was going to say something.
No, I just agreeing. The only doubt would be, is he going to do some twist and add something else to the story? So kind of expecting that it's not going to be an obvious one, but sometimes it is.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I guess I can understand that Jane wants to do this properly. She wants to take everybody to go back to civilization and present the evidence to the authorities. I suspect, even though it's not overtly said, I suspect that Jane probably figured Alexis did it as well, but knew there was no legal proof and just had to take the situation as was given to her until they could get back to the authorities and she could turn the investigation over to the cops. So
that would make sense.
Mm-hmm. I do want to read a sentence here. This is dealing with the Wazari warriors. How Burroughs describes them in one chapter. It's just, here indeed were men, the very sight of whom would have instilled respect and perhaps fear in the hearts of any strange tribesman who might see them. So he writes with these Black warriors, African natives, with respect. He's saying that these are men who are brave, who are impressive to look at, and we have to say that sometimes Burroughs did use racial stereotyping. It was common in that era when he wrote. But in the end, he always treats his characters as individuals, and he had both good guys and bad guys among both races. So we have the village that with the chief who is double crossing everybody, and they're going to torture prisoners to death, and they're not very nice. But this is counterpointed by the Wazari, who are just respected warriors and good men. Burroughs is fair-minded in the way he presents people. He never presents one race as being all bad or all good. He's got good guys and bad guys mixed in everywhere. So he had a good understanding of human nature.
In fact, I wish they brought more Wazari with rifles too, because they're very good shots.
That's a good point. They showed up, like Lost Empire, for instance. They showed up there to rescue everybody at the end with modern rifles. Mm-hmm. They brought rifles with Flucidor too.
Yes, they did.
Didn't they? Right. So why the heck aren't they carrying rifles here? They would have come in awful handy later on.
Most definitely.
Yeah. Yes. And they obviously had them and they knew how to use them. So what was Mavuro thinking of? His daughter's kidnapped. He says, I'm going to get some guys and we're going to go try and figure out where my daughter is. And that makes sense. Why didn't he say, hey, guys, let's grab some rifles before we go? Mavuro's usually a pretty smart guy, but he kind of dropped the ball there. They should have had rifles.
He might have been moving, and since his daughter's involved, taking over. He could have been moving in haste. I can certainly see that. Seems like they do retrieve one or two weapons from that crashed plane.
They do
run into it for a minute, but still, that's not like arming everybody. It's only enough there for two people. They might even be short on ammo.
Yeah. If they had all had modern rifles, all 10 of them, they could have kicked butt. And of course, you wouldn't have had much of a story then. But
that might be the reason.
Yeah, but I can actually see that as a legitimate reason. Bavuro realizes his daughter is gone. Somebody says, hey, can't we go back to the bungalow and get some rifles? No, there's no time. This is my daughter. Let's just go. We can handle it. And
maybe he's not the caliber of man we thought he was.
I don't know about that. I think.
I'm sorry, bad thought.
I see. Caliber. Okay, it was such a bad pun.
Caliber.
Yes, it was such a bad pun that we didn't get it at first. So
I thought you were talking about Burroughs.
Yeah,
that's not new to me.
Yes. Okay. So, but I actually thought of that at some point. Is why the heck don't they have rifles this time? But I can see Mavuro just normally a good leader himself making this just spot decision because he's in a hurry to get his daughter. It's just let's just go.
And maybe he just grabbed the first 10 people he saw and said, "You're with me."
Yeah, he really could have done that. Yeah. Another thing I like in this section, this bit of chat, these chapters, is Brown is thinking about cutting off on his own and just looking for the longevity serum because he doesn't think he'll get a fair trial. But in the end, he sticks with the party because he wants to make sure that Jane and Annette are safe before he takes off. So he's got this, chivalry to him. He's just another indication that he's a good guy. He's not going to abandon everybody else until they're safe, even though he's afraid he might be sticking his neck into a noose and being hung for a murder he didn't commit.
And that further reinforces the point I was making earlier about whether or not how bad of a guy he was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another little bit of how good a leader Jane was. She does feel sorrow over Kitty's death, but she just suppresses that because right now her responsibility is to the living, and that has to take precedent. So another mark in the strong leadership column for Jane there.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on these chapters?
No, I'm done.
I'm good.
Okay. So chapter 16 moves back to Tarzan and the Wazari. They subdue some guards as they come into the hut. They get weapons off them. They um, eventually there's some good adventure stuff here, but eventually they get away. And the Wazari are still a little bit woozy from the drugs, but they let that they're able to get away and have that wear off. And meanwhile, a Wazari warrior shows up, with a message on a stick, the way they used to carry them. And he eventually gets this message to Tarzan, and it's that Jane is flying into Nairobi. And Tarzan wonders if the plane he heard that night of the storm was her plane. But he doesn't know yet that Jane's actually in trouble. So he decides to still continue to find Mavuro's daughter, to find the Kavuro and find out what they're doing with the girls. Nikima, by the way, takes the stick and the envelope, and this is his great toy. For the next few days, he's carrying around this stick with an envelope at the end. And he protects it at all costs. He meets a female monkey from a nearby tribe. And he's just very jealous, even when he's like making time with this female. His main concern is this envelope on a stick, because that's just such an awesome thing. And he doesn't notice that Tarzan and the Wazari start north while he's playing with his stick and trying to impress his new girlfriend. It's an hysterical scene. It's a sweet scene too. It's amazing that Burroughs gets this little bit of sweetness in for a monkey playing with his stick and his like new girlfriend. But it's just really, you kind of like thinking, hey, Nikima, good job, you got a girlfriend. And there's a sweetness to it that's really just amazing. So chapter 17 is back to Jane and her group, where Alexa is declaring his love for Jane. And she reacts to that by threatening to impale him with a spear if he tries to put a move on her. She doesn't think much of him. And I think she probably, even if she weren't a married woman, I think she probably recognizes that Alexis' emotions are not sincere, that if anything, what he's feeling is lust. Alexis also tries to bribe Annette for that piece of cloth that could indicate he had committed the murder. And he tries to convince her that Brown and Jane are in love with each other. But she still won't give him this cloth. And he starts to choke her. She cries out. Tibbs run over to help her. Alexis says that a snake frightened her. Annette agrees, kind of with some irony, that it was a snake that scared her. She does not rat out Alexis, which I wish she had, but she's afraid of him. And he actually gets a chance to say, don't say anything about this or I will kill you. They camp down for the night. They let Annette take one of the watches, but during the night, she and Brown talk some more and they profess their love for each other. But then by morning, she has disappeared. So Annette is now missing. Chapter 18 is more just wonderful stuff with Nikima and his paper on a stick and the girl monkey he's with, who at one point gets the paper away and runs off. By the time she catches her, he can't find the paper. But he does find Jane's note in their original camp as a replacement. So he puts this on his stick and he brings it to Tarzan, but where he thinks Tarzan is, but he discovers they've moved on. So when the female monkey's clan comes up and they chase Nikima away, he just starts to follow Tarzan's trail. And important to remember that the note he now has on the end of his stick is now the one that Jane left behind at the campsite after the plane wreck. So that's important information there. Chapter 19 takes us once again back to Jane and his group. Brown accuses Alexis of harming Annette and actually attempts to kill him. Jane breaks them up. There's still this ongoing conflict before them all. Jane follows Annette's tracks, which stop under a tree, And so she's able to deduce that a man or a man-like creature had grabbed her from and lifted her up into the branches. You know, they can't find her. There's no way to find her. So they decide to continue to move on to civilization. Alexa's still trying to convince Jane that he loves her. Jane punches him in the face at one point. And Jane has to once again stop Brown from just killing Alexis for getting too forward with Jane. Because, you know, Brown's a gentleman and he will step in to protect a married woman just on principle. That night, you know, Tibbs is near exhausted. He wants to be left behind, but Brown and Jane won't hear of it. Jane wants to hunt for food. Brown's not happy with this because, you know, when Annette disappears, he's afraid Jane will as well. But that night, Alexis tries to kill Brown with the axe, and that's where the chapter ends. And chapter 20 that's back to Nekima and Tarzan. He catches up with Tarzan. Tarzan notices that the paper on the stick is different. He has some trouble getting it from Nekima, who thinks this is just a game of playing keep away. But eventually, Tarzan gets the note. He reads it, and so sorry, I lost track of there for a moment. So yeah, the chapter ends basically with Tarzan getting the note that will tell him that Jane and her plane had crashed. Chapters 21 through 25, chapters 16 through 20 is what we just did.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I do really think that Nekima's activities throughout these chapters, they're delightful, they're funny, they're actually kind of sweet. Burroughs never forgets that Nekima is a monkey and he's not a human being. And he uses his monkey traits, like not realizing the note he has is important, to add both tension and humor to the plot.
You'll see that in a lot of movies too.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes done very well and sometimes not so well, but to do a little diversion or take a little bit of tension off of it, whether it's a war movie or horror movie or science fiction, just to kind of give that little subplot, or if you want to call it, or distraction to give yourself a little breather room there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've listed like 4 or 5 duties here that I see Nekima having in these books, and including he moves the plot along sometimes. He provides humor. He gives Tarzan somebody to talk to. He can run errands. He can go get help, and he can relay messages.
Mm-hmm. Do we know why Nekima became Cheetah in most of the movies and TV shows?
My understanding is that chimpanzees were considered easier to work with.
Okay.
And whoever was putting together movies probably did not read the books.
Yeah. And so just came up with what they thought was a good name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a cheetah, I mean, there is an animal named a cheetah. And when I was a youngster, I found that confusing. I actually.
But yeah, Nekima in the book, and Cheetah, when used well in the movies, is a good character and does provide humor. But he doesn't hold a candle to Nekima. He's just a much superior character, not just in carrying the story along better, but just being more fun and more likable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure it's just I think chimpanzees, because of whether circuses or carnivals or stores, exhibit and stuff, were more common to have around and better known for being able to train to make it a little more like animal human type humor like Cheetah does. I don't think they're would be as likely to do that nowadays, when people realize just how dangerous and strong chimpanzees are.
Yeah, they've kind of lost their reputation for being fun because they occasionally eat people's faces off. So yeah, that was always one fun part of the animated cartoon, was it was Nekima, not Cheetah.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the reasons to admire the Saturday morning animated cartoon so much.
Love the cartoon.
Regarding Nakima's antics with that stick, though, I agree. It amazes me the mileage that Burroughs gets out of that. And there's a literary term for this, and I cannot think of what it is. I want to say device or gimmick or prop, but it adds an element of mystery and wonder because I mean I'm reading those passages about Nakima and his stick with great interest because I just know there's some valuable message on the end of that stick. And I'm confident Tarzan's going to get it, but when's he going to get it, under what circumstances, and what all has to happen before they get there? Mm-hmm. So that can be engaged in. I've read this several times.
Yeah, it's just a fun way of moving the story around along. Nakima is possibly used more effectively here than he was in any other novel. I know he goes for help for the Wazari back in Tarzan and the Lost Empire, and he does some useful stuff in others. But this is like Nakima's really shines in this book more so than in any of the other books he appears in. So
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Another observation about this book being a murder mystery. Now, the first murder we've had there with Kitty, it's fairly obvious to anyone who's been paying attention who the culprit is there, particularly when Alexis is trying to retrieve his bloody shirt or bloody piece of cloth or whatever it was. But now Annette comes up missing, and we wonder what happened there. Well, we again, if for those paying attention, we saw that kind of process that she disappeared by from the Kavuru that Tarzan observed. But still, it still adds a little bit of a murder mystery as to who's going to be the next victim and how will they be caught and those kinds of things. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I was just going to move on to chapter 21, unless we have more comments from this section.
I think I'm commented out.
Okay. Well, chapter 21, it starts with, Alexa was trying to crack open Brown's skull with an axe. Tibbs wakes up and warns Brown. So Alexa's blow to the Brown's head misses, and Alexis runs off into the jungle. And Jane says, just let him go. I think by now, whatever doubts she had about who the killer was are gone. And just let him go. He's on his own. We'll get back to civilization on our own. But that next night, after they've moved on another march, Jane disappears. And Brown and Tibbs are the only two left now. In fact, the chapter is called Only Two Left. They search and they can't find her. They don't know what happened. Brown blames Alexis. And I think Burroughs actually does a pretty good job here of leaving it, even as our readers, we know about the Kavuru and how they can lure women away with their hypnotic sound. But we don't know at this particular moment if it was Alexis or the Kavuru who grabbed Jane. Either one is possible at this particular moment. In chapter 22, Nakima finds Tarzan, who's by now has read Jane's note. So he sends Mavuro and the other warriors to continue towards the Kavuru land, because remember, Mavuro's daughter is still a prisoner there, along with other women. But Nakima, in the meantime, leads Tarzan back to the campsite where he found the note. Now Tarzan can now start trailing Jane and their group himself. In the meantime, Alexis is alone in the jungle in a panic, starting to go insane, and a lion is stalking him. And that's how the chapter 22 ends, with that lion stalking him. Chapter 23 picks up with Tarzan saving Alexa from the lion. And he questions Alexis. Alexis relates that his wife was murdered and that the party abandoned him, and Lady Greystoke is in love with Brown. And he tells him the direction they've headed in. And Tarzan's not sure that Alexis, his story's inconsistent, and he doesn't know how much of what he's telling is the truth. But he feels he has to help him, because as far as he knows, the guy is a friend of Jane. So he's going to take him along as he finds Jane, as he looks for Jane and Brown, right after he hunts for some food. Chapter 24 does reveal that Jane was captured by a Kavuru. She was lured hypnotically out into the jungle and captured. And he's taking them back to their homeland. To Kavanda is the name of their homeland. Burroughs just loved multisyllabic names sometimes, just to drive the readers nuts when we have to read them out loud. So she learns that this guy's name is Ugly, and she talks. She's trying to get information out of him. He eventually threatens to cut out her tongue for talking too much, because Kavanda Vanda does not need her tongue, but that implies they need her for something. And so they arrive at the village. They find out that the Kavuro men are rewarded with a necklace of teeth for every woman they capture. And he takes her up into Ugo leads her up to the top of a windowless building and has her climb down a ladder into a pitch black room. In the meantime, chapter 25, Mavuro and the Wazari are also approaching the Kavuro village. And in the meantime, a plane shows up and it circles overhead for a while looking for a place to land. It's apparently low on gas. And it makes a dangerous landing on the plane outside the Kavuro village. And there's a great action scene where the Kavuro people attack the plane. The Wazari jump in. The guys from the plane do have guns, and they initially, unfortunately, mistake the Wazari as enemies as well, because the Kavuro are white guys. They think that they might be friendly. So they end up getting killed. Most of the Wazari are killed. The two surviving Wazaris, Balundu and Mavuru, managed to grab some pistols from the dead pilots and climb to a rocky summit. And from there, they're able to hold off the Kavuro with the pistols. As night falls, the Kavuro avoid the airplane. They don't understand what it is, and they just want to avoid it. Mavuro and Bolendo get away into the jungle, and they're just wishing that Tarzan were there. And so that is chapters 21 through 25. I think I like Alexis's descent into fear and insanity. I think that's it's very vivid and an understandable route for his character to take once he's lost in the jungle and everything seems hopeless and all his plans have fallen apart. I can see him going nuts the way we see him slowly going insane. And I do like the way also Burroughs is beginning to tie all the plot threads together. Jane and as in Tarzan have kind of had separate stories, but now they're coming all together. And we also, get some effective foreshadowing about what's going on in the Kavuro village when Jane notices there's no women or children around, and she still doesn't know what's going on with that. And we as readers still don't know quite what's going on with it as well. And we've already talked about why the Wazari didn't bring modern rifles. They would have done a lot better in that fight. That was a cool fight. One thing I kind of do wish, this is a nitpick, I know, but that plane, Burroughs gets away with using coincidence a lot, making it seem like a natural part of the story. It was one of his strengths. Here, we just have a plane that just shows up, and we're never really, just a sentence that said they were looking for Jane's plane or something to explain why it's there, I think would have helped. Because you just have, the plane which becomes an important plot device later on, just kind of drops into the story without explanation. And I think there was a reasonable explanation. They could have been searching for Jane's plane, but none is given. And I know that's a nitpick, but that's and this is a great story, but that's one little criticism I'm going to forward there, is I think Burroughs should have explained what that plane was doing there rather than just having it show up.
I would not call it a nitpick. In fact, I was going to raise up that very point, is we never found out any more about that plane than it dropped by, its people got killed, and it provided some help to the Wazari later on, but with the weapons and all that. Beyond that, we don't know anything about it. That's another one of those great unsolved mysteries that Burroughs leaves behind for later use, maybe. And gee whiz, a whole story could be written around that plane.
Yeah, and I do think there was a reasonable explanation that Burroughs could have done in a sentence. It's just Jane's plane had been lost for some days now. They were searching for it, and they ran out of gas themselves, or had mechanical trouble. Whatever, I think, whatever reason they had to land, it would have been perfectly reasonable.
If they were looking for a friendly airport, that would be last on the list.
That would be last on the list. So
another item here, while I've got the floor, I've been anxious to see how. Of course, we discussed Alexis caterwauling and Brown's attempt to coax him into some action. I've been anxious to see how Tarzan would handle this. And his solution was unique: just throw Alexis on his shoulder and take to the trees. Not everybody can do that. But I was glad to see that Tarzan finally is taking care of this fellow. If anyone can handle Tarzan,
yeah, and that's not an unusual thing to happen in Tarzan novels. Is someone to be thrown over his shoulders and up into the trees and just be terrified for a moment until they realize that he's carrying them safely from point A to point B.
It's a quick and effective solution. I'll
say yeah, it's like an e-ticket ride at Disney World. It's just
one more thing here. We don't really get any more information on how these hypnotic abductions work. I mean, we've seen them demonstrated, but as to how in the heck they're actually able to do that is not really explained in detail.
Yeah, and Burroughs doesn't do as much background world building for the Kavuro as he did, for instance, in the Ant-Man book, where he gave us their histories and an explanation of why their society is.
Right.
We really don't find out how the Kavuro developed into the society they are and some of the abilities they have, like the hypnotic stuff. And we don't really need to have that. In this case, I think Burroughs just made a decision to move the story along quickly without worrying about it. But he does less world building here than he's done in the past.
I think it follows much more like King Solomon's Mines or She, where there might be a little background, but this is an action and adventure travelogue type movie. To get in and do that, it's what it is and or who they are, and that's what drives the story.
The rest is left to our imagination. Well, real quick, I had the thought, I'll try to condense this, that exactly where did these Kavuru people come from? And they're white, which is a little unusual in Africa. I was speculating that perhaps they came from a shipwreck decades ago, centuries ago, perhaps, and they were the survivors of a shipwreck, and they made their way into the interior, set up shop as their own little tribe, and somehow or another figured out this longevity elixir.
Another possibility is they could have been a faction from the Romans, from the Lost Empire, or the Crusaders, who just broke off and then degenerated and lost track of their technology, and then rebuilt into the society they had.
So there's plenty of other lost cities to choose from.
So the City of Gold. There could have been any of these places that they had broken off from like thousands of years ago or centuries ago, and just degenerated into what they became, especially after they discovered the immortality pill and didn't handle that with ethics in mind. So
all right, that's all I have.
When you theorize a shipwreck, maybe a space shipwreck.
They could be Venusians or from Barsoom. But if they had run from Mars, though, they already would have been.
I will admit, my first thought was a shipwreck from the ship that dropped off Jane and her dad on the African coast there. That rather than the one with Tarzan's parents. Hey, you could go back to that one actually. You can use either one. That ship actually had one of those ships had a wreck, and those are survivors. Barsoom had not occurred to me. I will concede that, but I think it's a darn good idea. As I said, there's a story there waiting to be told.
Well, if Barsoomians who end up on Earth lose their natural immortality, and then they might have actually made an effort to rediscover it somehow.
Yeah, that's motivation.
So that's not a bad thought either.
You might have stumbled onto something here.
Yeah, it would depends on how realistic you want to get. They would have had to have gotten used to Earth. They would have had to have gotten used to Earth's gravity, which would have been a problem at first for them.
That would be agreed. That would be a problem that's been documented.
So, but then maybe from Venus. So,
well, maybe that's what happened to that, and the gravity shrunk them.
Yeah, maybe.
Way off.
Didn't the Venusians have their own immortality treatments?
Yes, they did. Yeah, that's
Okay,
one of the first
so
things
if
they give to Carson when he comes to visit them. They don't know him from Adam. They give him the longevity treatment.
yeah, so if they somehow some Venusians somehow ended up on Earth, and then had to rediscover like in an immortality syndrome and came up with a different one,
Mm-hmm.
then that's not a bad theory either.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't have had to have worried about gravity.
True.
So
True.
Yeah.
Wheels are turning.
mhm. Okay, but the last few chapters, Brown and Tibbs are still on their own, but Tarzan catches up with them. He hears them talking about the murder. He's actually kind of thinking that he wants to kill Brown because, according to Alexis, Brown had been putting moves on Jane. But fortunately, he hears them talking about the murder and the disappearance of Jane and Annette. He realizes they're good guys. He drops down on them. Um, we get some more great humor here. Brown's reaction to Tarzan after Tarzan introduces himself. Yeah, well, I'm glad to meet you, Tarzan. I'm Napoleon. And then Tarzan ends up throwing Brown into a bush and saying, "You forgot Waterloo, Napoleon." Um,
I think that also shows Tarzan's grasp of history and education
yeah,
as he came out of the jungle and was educated.
Mm-hmm. He's been doing some reading, obviously.
Yeah.
But we get back to Jane, who is this is chapter 27 now. Annette is in that dark room as well. Jane immediately starts planning an escape, and Annette feels they're doomed, but Jane is encouraging her and saying, "No, we can do this. We can get out somehow." And I love that she starts to vamp Uglit into, she sees escape. He's fallen for her too. There's like three different people who fall for Jane. Alexis, and then Ugla, and then later the king of the Kavuru are all going to fall for Jane, which happens a lot in her life. I think I counted up like other than Tarzan, there's at least 7 different people who fall in love or in lust with her over the course of the novels. She probably did not have any trouble getting a date for her prom back in high school. But I love the bit where she's just trying to vamp Ugla and just go, let us go. You can come with us. It'll be nice. And she's saying, she tells Annette, no, of course I'm not going to do anything with him, but all is fair in love and war. We can get him to get us out of here, and then we can make a break for it. And even, she just keeps her cool the whole time. She even keeps her cool later when she's introduced to Kavanda Vanda. Darn it, Edgar, for giving a name that's hard to say to the king. He gets the hots for her too, but she just continues to be observant to any chance to escape. As I said, that's 3 bad guys who fall in love with her over the course of the book. But the tension between Ugla and Kavanda Vanda is used to advance the plot. Alexa gets killed during these two. She gets eaten by a leopard, right? Kind of a gruesome end, but you really can't feel sorry for him. Now, Tarzan, Brown, and Tibbs show up, and they find out, they meet the 2 surviving Wazari, and they come up with one of my favorite plans ever. Whoops, sorry. If a noise comes up on the recording, that was me bumping the microphone. Sorry about that. I love this plan. Remember, Brown is a pilot. So they're going to take off with the plane, which is going to be difficult. Brown, we're going to see how good a pilot he is because he's going to have to bounce the plane over a boulder while trying to take off in this field because it's not a smooth runway. It's a field. They're going to go up in the plane and then parachute out into the village. And the sight of the plane panics a lot of the Kavuru people. And there's just great action scenes here. I won't try to just explain it all, but they get into the village, they rescue Jane, they find an escape, and Annette, they find an escape route. We find out that Tarzan has no objection to using firearms when the situation calls for it. And he's a good shot. He uses a pistol to finish off Kavanda. And so they all get away. And that the whole plan of taking up the plane and just parachuting out into the village is a great one. It's very innovative. It makes me wish all the more that Burroughs had come up with a reason for the plane being there. So it didn't seem like such a deus ex machina that it was just there. So the good guys are all safe. There's a final scene in the bungalow. And I think it's a nice touch that Tibbs is just a part of the party. He's nervous about being considered an equal among the nobility, among the Greystokes, but they're just treating him as one of the guys, as another guest. And I love that touch. And it's and they talk about the immortality pills. They divide up what they have for everyone to use or not use as they see fit. And they decide not to make them public or try to make money with it. Brown has a great line. Suppose Congress gets a hold of them. Just think of that. Not on your life. So, and I think we can still feel about that way today, like, nearly 100 years later. So, and at this point, Jess, you wrote a great article about whether or not Tarzan or Jane would have used these pills. Do you want to summarize that?
I'll do what I can. I appreciate you bringing this up. The topic of the Kavuru elixir and pills arose in the ERB Universe book that came out, was a year ago. Tarzan Battle for Palooster, written by Scott Edgar. And one of the concerns about the original Kavuru pills is that it requires the death of young maidens to harvest some of their innards to use it in the creation of these pills. That's incredibly unethical, to say the least, and requiring the death of people to do something like that. So there has been concern. There's always been a question, because Burroughs, as you described here in this very last chapter, surviving heroes here from the story are gathered around the table and they're discussing what to do with the pills. Now, be aware that Tarzan is not mentioned specifically. We don't know specifically that he's there at that meeting. You go back and reread it. I don't think you'll find any specific mention that says Tarzan was sitting here. Jane makes a statement. But as far as Tarzan, I'm not entirely sure he was even there. But it seems to several fans, and me included, that it would be unlikely that Tarzan or Jane would partake of this stuff because of the death of young women being required in order to make it.
It would almost be cannibalism, or actually almost would be cannibalism.
Unethical. Yeah, cannibalism. It'd be the concern. And I certainly don't want my heroes behaving like that. Even though I want my heroes to last forever, yes, but not at that kind of a cost.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been a question in Burroughs fandom over the years. So they've addressed that question in the book Battle for Palooster, which is an excellent book, by the way. We talked about it some time ago here in this discussion. That surviving the remaining, some of the remaining Kavuru pills were turned over to scientists who were able to, I think the word is the process, so that no one needs to be killed in order to create these things. And in Tarzan Battle for Palooster, it is confirmed there that Tarzan and Jane did take the synthesized pills and are continuing. Granted, it's not invulnerability, it's not immortality, it is longevity, meaning that they are still functioning very well, even at an advanced age. And I have written an article about this, which appears in the Muckers magazine about a year ago. March 31, 2021 was the publishing date of the Muckers magazine, also the Panthans magazine. I sent a copy of the Bibliophiles, but they haven't gotten to it yet. It's in Urbab also. And certainly I can make it available for anyone who's interested. Go ahead, Tim. I think you started to say something.
Well, it also explains, I think, in Tarzan and the Foreign Legion, which is 3 or 4 books later, and it's set in the 1940s. So Tarzan by now should be getting a little older.
Right.
And the group he's with wonders why he's not, and he explains about a witch doctor who is grateful for his life being saved doing a ceremony that kept him from aging. And he also mentions the immortality pill, or the longevity pills, rather. When I read that, first time I read that years ago, it had been some time since I read Tarzan Quest, and I'd forgotten the bit about, women being killed to make those pills.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wondered why he put in another immortality method with the witch doctor or longevity when he already had the pills. Why add the other one? But I think Burroughs was thinking about the ethics of swallowing those pills as well.
I agree totally.
And wanted to come up with a way why Tarzan wasn't any older. And so he put in that extra explanation.
Right.
I don't think he overtly said Tarzan didn't take the pills, but I think it's a good implication he did. Otherwise, the other ceremony just would have been unnecessary.
Right. Some excellent books have come out of that in the crossover universe.
Yeah. Yeah. And so and then artificially reproducing it explains why also you could have Korak and Miriam and all of them all being able to remain into the stories through the decades without having to worry about them getting too old.
Exactly. Even I think even Jad Balja might have received treatment.
He might have. I know.
I don't recall if Nekima was mentioned or not.
Nekima is mentioned in Foreign Legion as anyone who Tarzan says something like anyone who took the pill hasn't aged, including a monkey.
That's right. No,
so
Nekima, you're exactly right.
So Nekima did pop one of those pills and became centuries old monkey. I guess he'd still be around today.
I hope so.
I hope so. I just wonder if Tarzan eventually took him down to Pellucidar with him. So
I would hope so too.
So
when I discuss Tarzan with people in my discussion group or fellow fans or whomever, I would generally say, well, we know Tarzan had the witch doctor treatment. He describes it in Tarzan and the Foreign Legion, and also had access to the Kavuguru drugs, although there is some complications in using that. But with the revelation from Wynn's book, Tarzan Battle for Pellucidar, I can refer to the Kavuguru elixir, and without worrying about violating any ethics or having a cause to death of some young lady someplace.
Any contradictions in the canon now?
Yeah, and even fans who just like to think of just Burroughs' novel as canon and the others as alternate universes, which is a choice that a fan can make and it's perfectly legitimate. Indeed. He still has a in-universe explanation that don't involve the pills for why Tarzan is still young and active during World War II.
Exactly right. And to your point, when we were discussing Tarzan's longevity, well, while the pills were questionable, the statements he made in Tarzan and Foreign Legion came straight from him, and he was telling other people about it.
Yeah.
And he's not the kind to boast. And in fact, one of the things I like about Foreign Legion is he opens up with strangers, or more or less strangers, more so than we've ever seen him open up with anybody else.
Of course, they had earned his respect. There was one of the soldiers or a bomber crews, I guess, jumps over a rhinoceros or something. I mean, he gets a compliment from Tarzan. That's one of the bravest things I've ever seen. So I think Tarzan opens up with him. We've got to do in a future broadcast. We have to do Tarzan and the Foreign Legion.
Oh, I agree totally.
Because there's great characters in that, and if you have Tarzan telling you that's one of the bravest things I've ever seen, then you've done good. So
it's a good day.
So I can see Tarzan deciding these guys are friends. I can share stuff with them.
Right.
So he's normally reticent, but he's sharing danger with them, and they're proving to be brave companions. And so what the heck? He's friends with them now.
There's and the Gold Key adaptation of that book, Tarzan and the Foreign Legion, it does cover that conversation just a little bit. You get some good shots of good picture. I hate to say shots, good pictures of the plane while they're talking, and that's a favorite comic story of mine too.
Yeah, I just going back to Ant-Man, where Tarzan crashes a plane on his first solo mission. I know in Foreign Legion he was an RAF reserve officer, but I wonder if they actually let him fly a plane since his record wasn't that good.
Now, granted, this is not written by Burroughs, but it's another fine author, and that's Will Murray. In his return to Paludan, which was the first of the Wild Adventures out of ERB Inc.'s product line there. Tarzan does fly.
Okay.
Which is how he gets into Paludan.
Okay. It's easier than slogging through that swamp, I guess.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So, okay, well, that's Tarzan's Quest. I think we all agree it was a fun novel that's got wonderful action scenes and shows off Burroughs' sense of humor, perhaps better than, I think one of the top books in showing off his sense of humor. And we might have had a few little criticisms about the lack of world building with the Kavuru and the plane showing up without explanation, but those are nitpicks. This is really a fun novel. I'm glad we picked this one because I had not reread it in years and I had forgotten how much fun it was. The interactions between the various characters, Brown and Annette and all those are all fun. And as I mentioned, that whole idea of taking off in the plane and just abandoning the plane and parachuting down into the Kavuru city was just a wonderful plan. I love that bit. So it's a great novel, and it's worth reading. So anyone listening who hasn't read it recently, just crack it open and read it.
I do know that Tarzan and the Foreign, no, I beg your pardon, Tarzan's Quest is the book we're talking about. I do know that is one of the 4 books designated for the next release from the ERB authorized library.
Okay.
When that will be, I think they're still targeting, where are we now? We're at the end of October. I think they're still targeting this year, but I haven't heard anything specific.
Have we seen any of the covers for it yet? Or I know Joe occasionally shares what he's working on.
Right. So. I don't think I've seen any covers for this.
Okay,
yet. I check for those.
I'm really curious about what Joe will pick for his scene for cover scene for this because there's so many potentially great choices. Actually, I don't. I've never met Joe or talked with him other than trading some messages on Facebook or post comments on Facebook once. But I just wonder how much he struggles with some of these books to pick what scene to use because there's so many great choices and so many of them.
Well, he knows these books as well as any of us. He's
he does.
That helps.
Mm-hmm. They never disappoint. The covers never disappoint. No,
they
beautiful work the last couple of years.
Yeah, these are covers that are, some breathtaking is often exaggeration, but they're not with these covers. You look at these covers and they actually make you gasp. So they're that good. These are worth buying just for the covers alone. So, but the extra, the forwards and the extra information in them is cool too. So they're just, yeah.
That adds what you're saying earlier about the books. It isn't necessarily that previous books with the artwork and stuff, St. Alan, Frazetta, all these people, they're marvelous works, but these new authorized editions with the artwork, with the binding, the paper used, the new material added to it, these are all in all overall an incredible presentation of the works of ERB. They're beautiful books.
Yeah, I agree.
And those I want to mention those covers, the artwork, the book covers is available as a print from iCanvas.com for those who are not aware. But yeah, iCanvas.com, search for the Edgar Rice Burroughs collection, and you should find around 70 or 80 items, which includes the book covers that Joe Jusko's done.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our discussion. And so we appreciate everyone who's been listening tonight, and we hope you've enjoyed it, and we will be back again. We are recording this again at the end of October in the year 2022. We probably won't manage another one until after the new year, but I'll try and do some mini episodes in the meantime to get some new contact out there. And we also will announce what book we're doing next when we decide that. I'm tempted to say Tarzan and the Foreign Legion, and I do want to do that one, but we've done several Tarzans in a row. We ought to pick something from somewhere else for next time. So we'll message each other and figure it out. So
Tim, excuse me, any news from our store? Any new developments there?
Nope, still nobody's buying nothing. So
what's the website? Where can they find it? What will they find?
It is cafepress.com/ERB podcast. It will always be in the show notes. And we have got great material there done by an artist named Ben Alvarez, who does some superb work. You can get Griff, you can get a Griff t-shirt, you can get a Tarkus mug, you can get Woola shot glasses. There's all sorts of things with great images. We always appreciate the Edgar Rice Burroughs people and giving us permission to use images directly from the stories.
Support your family podcast.
So support your family podcast. I know we are not the only podcast that has a store that has trouble selling material. So it's a common podcast problem. So people buy it, make us rich beyond the dreams of avarice, and we'll buy mansions and invite everybody over for dinner one day.
Maybe we need to get a couple of those shot glasses and end every podcast with them, because like having lived in Minnesota and the Vikings and Skull, we could just hold them up and go, walla walla.
Yeah, because our podcast though is all audio, so nobody would get that. So
we could take pictures to match.
We could take pictures. We could. So, okay. Well, to sign off, once again, my name is Tim DeForest. You can find my blog at Comics, Old Time Radio, and other cool stuff, and links to my Amazon.com author page there. Jess, you want to plug anything before we go?
And my name is Jess Terrell, and I invite everyone to come over to Facebook and our Facebook discussion group for the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs. We're open pretty near 24/7, talking Burroughs, worlds, characters, and stories to our heart's content. We'd love to have you join us for love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs.
And I'd like to say thanks to ERB Inc. for the leeway they've given us and approaching this material and doing what we do, and also to plug those comic strips online. They're fantastic. And if no one has any of the recent, like they put out the collection of the I Am a Barbarian in the slipcover. Thomas Simmons wrote it, and Benito did the art on it. It's a beautiful volume. You fans out there, go ahead and get it. I'll have some more randomized studio information on our next podcast.
Yeah, which actually we should say also that they have reprinted the Tarzan New Adventure strips in a book form. Yeah. That's just come out.
And that's superb too.
New stories written by Roy Thomas with great artwork. So these online comic strips, I will print. I will put a link to the site there. It is a subscription site, but it's like $2 a month, and it's well worth it for what you get. So I'll put a link in the show notes to the online comics as well.
We talked earlier about the new Jane Webb comic. I guess one of several.
Yep. I'll put links to the I Am Barbarian and the Tarzan new collection to their Amazon pages too, in case anybody wants to pick those up.
Very good.
And to the G-Con. Our website, our store is cafepress.com/ERB podcast. Mm-hmm. And our the site for this is erbpodcast.blogspot.com. But you can also find this on various podcast platforms. You can find it on Amazon, Audible, Apple, Spotify. It'll be on all those. I posted on a site that just automatically spreads it out to all of those. So you can find this just wherever you go for podcasts, you can find us. So we appreciate listeners. I know that we have. I've never had a good sense of the number of listeners, but I know we have somewhere in the hundreds listening at least every episode, and we appreciate all of you. So thank you, and we'll talk to you all again soon.